Hey guys, today I'm going to go through a timeline for the Tara Baker case, starting in 2001, after the crime occurred, obviously, and we're going to go all the way through to the start of the trial. So I'll probably have to do some more specific videos on some of this stuff, so we'll just kind of go through each slide. So the first one is Jennifer Coursey, and she was a forensic scientist at the GBI in 2001. So she did the initial testing on the SA kit. So back then, what they did was they screened the evidence for sperm. So either just looking through a microscope or by staining the cells, because sperm cells stain a particular color. And because DNA technology wasn't as good back then, they couldn't do any further testing if they didn't find any sperm or blood or saliva, I think. So she tested the kit and she didn't find any sperm. So that was all she could do with the swabs at that point. So she just put them away. So during the trial, I think what I gathered was that there wasn't any chain of custody after those initial entries. It was a bit confusing, and Cruz did try to have the chain of custody records admitted into evidence, but Lisa just kind of put it off, and I'm not too sure what ended up happening with that. I found an operations bulletin from November 2001. So it's within the same year that the crime occurred. And it says, just goes on about microscopic comparison of hair and that they are no longer going to be doing that because they're going to perform STR DNA analysis on suitable hairs. So it says that they will continue to perform the microscopic testing on hairs to provide investigative leads, but only of things such as these, which are easy to see from comparison or from like looking at them under a microscope. It also says here that they will only accept hair evidence if there's no other meaningful forensic evidence available for the case. Because I think back then it was more expensive. It says that hair evidence already in their possession will be checked for suitability. So that's interesting in 2001. The next thing I found was a 2006 operations bulletin from July. And this one was about the YSTR DNA testing. So in the trial, Bolden kept trying to get the witnesses to talk about that the tests that were available, that became available in 2017. And I think he was doing that on purpose. It might be true that the particular YSTR test that they used in 2024 they might have only had that one since 2017, but this type of DNA testing has been around since 2006. So this is the one where it tests for the presence of male DNA rather than the presence or absence of sperm. So perfect for this case, obviously. So just goes through what they can do. And it also talks about CODIS and that they routinely search CODIS for matches in 2006. So also in 2006, they had another look at the case with some new detectives. So Courtney Gale and Sean Potter were the lead detectives in 2006. So they started looking into the case again. And we didn't hear from those two. I'll talk about why in the trial, but we did hear from David Griffith, who was a crime analyst at the time. So he just basically read the case files and looked through all the evidence. And then he did a presentation to the FBI about the case. And the FBI said, oh, why don't you look at Chris Milton's hard drives? And David Griffith was like, oh, I don't actually know if he had any. I don't know. It turns out, well, we don't know if he had any hard drives, but the one thing that was stolen from the scene was Tara's laptop. So that would have a hard drive. So that's interesting. At the beginning of 2007, there's a report from a request that was put in for mitochondrial DNA testing on some hairs. And I'll show you the part of the report. I do have another video on this, but it's got the results here from the tests that they did. But then it's also got here, see certificates of analysis dated August 28, 2001 and March 21, 2006 for previously submitted evidence and previously reported results. So I'd be really interested to see what that was. I couldn't find anything about that anywhere. In 2007, there was also on the knife evidence box, I was kind of having a look because there's a lot of initials and dates and lots of evidence tape, and the box is really ugly because it's obviously been handled so much. And there's this date here, Feb 1107, with the initials CW, and I think that is Cynthia Woods, and I will explain a bit more about that in a minute. In 2007, in August, one of the lead detectives who'd been looking at the case, Sean Potter, he died unexpectedly. I'm not sure how. I think it might have been self-unaliving, but it was really hard to find any information about that online. And then in December, just a few months later, Courtney Gale is injured and she almost dies. She gets put in a coma and she doesn't return to her position at doing the same thing at the Athens Police Department. She does stay in law enforcement, but just in different positions. You might actually know her if you know the area. So back to Cynthia Woods. The Ashley Hinkle from the GBI, she testified in the trial and she said that she used a report by Cynthia Woods that was done in 2010, and it was about DNA testing, and she basically just used that to look over everything and confirm that the only DNA they found on the knife and the ligature was that of Tara's. So we've got another operations bulletin. This one is 2015. So there's a bit of a gap. And this is the DNA analysis update. So this is where they are talking about DNA analysis on SA evidence collection kits, regardless of whether or not a suspect has been identified. So by submitting the kits to the lab as investigations are initiated, they can enter DNA profile information obtained from the kit into CODIS. And it says if your agency has SA evidence collection kits that have not been submitted to the lab, please contact them for further guidance. And it also says that they can do contact or touch DNA. And then there's another one in December. So the next one explains the SA kit initiative. So the GBI wanted to have the goal of doing DNA analysis on all SA evidence kits, and they were planning to use grant funding to outsource this analysis to private labs so that they can still keep up with current cases. So anything prior to January 1, 2015 could be resubmitted. So that's, 8 years before the Coleman-Baker Act? You'd think they would do that because it was a pretty high-profile case. And if you look at a lot of the media reporting and things over the years, they do claim that they have been working on the case the whole time. And obviously you can see that there's documentation that they have been as well. So I just wonder what they're hiding, allegedly. So 2017, this is just from the testimony in the trial where Bolden really wanted to, make that date really obvious so that people wouldn't think that they had had certain technology all along. So true allele was validated in 2017. That is correct. That is a probability software. But like we saw before, the YSTR testing was available already in 2006. So in 2018, it looks like they started going back over the case. So this guy here, Scott Black, he was still around at the trial, I think. So I'm not sure why he didn't testify. But anyway, David Norris and Scott Black were the two detectives that were put on that case. In 2018. And then you can see on the report that Norrie D, or David Norris, printed this in December of 2018. So this has got all of the list of the 15 DNA samples that they had from all these people. And they re-interviewed William Barrett and did a polygraph, apparently. So then I also found the 2022 service manual. So this just has information about what their processes are and things. And it also talks about YSTR, true allele, hair, and it says that they will routinely perform contact DNA analysis on violent crimes without prior approval. So I don't think it was difficult to get these kinds of tests done over the years. I suspect that maybe they did a lot of this over the years and they didn't. Well, I've got a few theories, but anyway. And then again, talking about CODIS. It says there's no need to request a routine search. They just do it all the time anyway. So this was in 2022. And given that Edrick's DNA has been in CODIS since 2001, you would think that over all these years, they probably would have gotten a hit if his DNA was originally on the swabs. Either that or they're just really incompetent. It could be either. So then we get to 2024. And this is Zykeira Sims. She works at the GBI crime lab, and they got her to testify about the retesting that happened in early 2024. So it was a little bit confusing because on the photos of the evidence, there's initials and dates. GS on March 1st and ADS on March 7th. And that's on the oral swabs. I couldn't work out who those people are. So I don't know. I need more information about this whole chain of custody because I don't know why she's testifying about that. I would have thought her initials would be on the envelopes if she was involved in that. She did present some reports, so it would be good to look at those, but obviously I don't know how that would happen. So 2024 in April, this is apparently when they got a CODIS hit on the 30th of April on 2i, on the partial profile that they got from 2i. And from what I could gather, they did the retesting using the YSTR DNA profile thing on the swabs in March, and then it seems as though they sent them straight to Ashley Hinkle for true allele comparison to Tara and Chris because they were the known reference samples at that time. And Ashley Hinkle, she used that data to run the comparison, and she did a report dated 2nd of May that talked about Chris Melton matching the profile on 2B, which is the rectal swab, and 2J, which was one of the oral swabs. And at this point, there was no mention of Edrick because they didn't have his name at that point, and they didn't have a reference sample either. I think probably Liz Bigham was maybe confused. I don't know, maybe she didn't read the rest of the evidence. But she sets up a little coffee date with Chris to help him with his alibi and help him remember. And in my opinion, help him explain why his DNA was there so that they can catch the bad guy. As if he's not the bad guy, in my opinion. So, because they really want to hunt their bad guy, as Jeremy says. So on the 6th of May, Lizzie goes to court and gets a warrant for Edrick's location data. And she gets that warrant from the 7th of May to the 13th of May. And I'll go more into that in another video, the search warrants and stuff. On the 8th of May, a police officer uses the location data to find Edrick and pulls him over for a routine traffic stop. And then he gets him to do an alcohol breath test and sends that back to, I guess, Lizzie and Jeremy to get the DNA profile off of that. So they get the DNA profile off of that, and then they use that to confirm the hit on CODIS. And then, yeah, she got her arrest warrants, and Edrick was arrested. And then on the 10th, they did get the buccal swabs from him. I don't think he had any choice. and he was obviously in jail at this time, and he is in jail from the 9th of May 2024. In June, I think it was the 11th, Ashley Hinkle did a second report where she had used the reference sample from the buccal swabs and run the analysis again to see if his profile matched, and it came back that it did match to I and to J. While all of this was happening, the July term of the grand jury was happening, and on the 2nd of August, they indicted Edrick on 12 counts. And then in August, I think Lizzie freaked out a little bit because she's thinking, oh no, this evidence doesn't really look very good. Melton isn't looking good. I need to fix this because we've already put in all this effort to get our bad guy. What are we going to do? So Zykeira Sims makes some cuttings of oral swabs I and J to send for additional testing. And then they get to go on a little journey across the country to be reclassified by a fancy private forensic company, Pure Gold Forensics. And Marissa Lycon did the presumptive tests and concluded that they were labelled incorrectly. I have another video on that. So this whole time, Edrick's been in jail since May. Attorney Cruz is on board, and he's been fighting in the background and filing motions and stuff. And then in 2025, again, Edrick sits in jail for the whole year. Cruz continues putting motions in and trying to get things happening. The docket is really long. And in 2026, in January, before they started the trial, they tried to get the judge recused for bias. They were unsuccessful, unsurprisingly, and the trial began. I'm going to leave it there because there is just so much more. But as you can see, if you look at the timeline as a whole, there were so many opportunities throughout the years for more testing to have been done, for more things to have been found out. And it really took the political motivations and things happening with the powerful people to refocus on this case for their own reasons, in my opinion. And then all of a sudden, new evidence is found. And I don't know, I just don't buy it. Like I've said before, I'd like to think that these people wouldn't plant DNA, but in my opinion, there doesn't really seem to be any other reasonable solution to this problem. Anyway, if you've got any ideas, please comment. Thanks.